Ratliff. I'm from South Yellow Elementary, and as we all know, February is Black History Month, and we all try to incorporate African American history throughout our classroom and within our lesson. This past year, one of my friends at the school introduced me to a place called Gee's Bend, Alabama. Her husband actually, his grandparents and his dad was from Camden. And so you're going to learn a lot about Gee's Bend. Is anyone in here familiar with Gee's Bend, Alabama? Okay. And she got the opportunity to go and visit. And so once you learn about their quilts, you'll understand the significance of that one. So when she went to visit, she actually purchased that one. And I just want to get a guesstimate. How much do you think that just a random quilt of this size would cost?
$200.
$500. So there's so much history behind Gee's Bend that you're going to learn today, and I hope you go back and share it with your classroom and the many other things that we'll discuss today. One thing about me is I am a one-focus teacher, and what that means is I teach all subjects to my students, and so I have them all day. And because I have them all day, I'm able to build a closer relationship with those students. And we do a lot of read alouds, and I brought a lot of the read alouds that I will use during February, just so that you could look through them if you wanted. But because of those read alouds, they kind of open us up to deeper conversations within the classroom. And because I'm with those students, I have deeper conversations than I would have with a class that I have typically 45 to 60 minutes a day. Here are the standards. Of course, we're going to be doing you won't be, but in the classroom, they would be doing a writing piece and on opinion writing. And of course, we're doing civil rights and history. We'll be talking about symbols, customs, and different celebrations and things of that nature. Okay, so I would like for one person from each table, if you could kind of like just get a couple over there with him, or just to talk with him. I want one person from each table to leave your eyes open. Everyone else close your eyes. Okay?
No. Okay, I'll leave them.
No. All right.
Are we closed right now?
Yes. Okay, so the person whose eyes have remained open, I'm going to show you an image in just a second. I want you to describe that image to the people at your table. Okay, you want them to visually see that. When we are talking to our students, whenever they are reading back their writing to themselves, if they can't see that picture in their head, then we know that they need to go back and make adjustments. Okay? So you're explaining, now go ahead and explain that to your table so that they can see it.
Okay, so it's definitely an image from slavery. Well, it's probably goes into freedom. There's children, women, men. I feel like I'm not doing a great job at describing this.
Okay, and stop. Okay, look at the image.
Everybody?
Yes, everyone.
Okay.
Did you see this at all as they were telling you the
Parts of it, yes.
Did you? Here, what are some of the things that you notice about this?
The quilt.
The quilt, okay, what else?
How it is like almost like in half, like there's one story on one side and a different story on the other side.
Oh,
Beginning and an end.
Yeah.
wow, I have not noticed that before now, but yes, you're right. These are all looking this way. What do you think that represents?
Well,
Some
that's,
sort of fight.
well, that's dark, and this
Yeah.
side is
Yeah.
light, like she said.
They're
Yeah.
going just ahead, they're looking back.
Yeah.
Kind of protect the ones that, especially that third one, he like kind of like reaching out to that woman, it seems like, to protect her from whatever's coming up from the back. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and what do you think is happening on this side?
Freedom.
They
Okay.
made it.
They're leaving.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
going to something new.
So do you think that tells a story? Yeah. How many of you can think back to your grandmas? My grandmother was a seamstress. That's what she did. My whole life, I remember many, many times stepping on needles and picking up thread and all of those sorts of things for her. That's what she would always do. But she made us quilts. And those quilts, to me, are priceless. How many of you can think of someone in your family or someone that you know of that made quilts? Do they tell a story? Do they represent something?
Yes.
Do you think they're a form of art?
Yes.
Absolutely.
They are? What word, if you could use one word, what word would you use to describe art?
Describe art.
One word definition.
Sentimental.
I think.
Sentimental?
Emotion.
Emotion.
I was about to say emotion.
Emotion.
I think timeless. Timeless, that is a good one.
Time, oh, yeah, that's good. What about expression?
Ooh, let's go.
Can art be defined as expression?
Yep.
Great. Can it be on a quilt? Of course it can. Okay, so as we talked about, there are definitely stories behind those quilts. What do you think? This one is titled End of the Line on the Underground Railroad. What do you think? What do you notice here? And I know that this is a blurred image. I've tried to find a much better one, but I couldn't. Do you see the story? If you were paying attention from the top to the bottom, it's the story of his life. Do you see that? This one is Threads of Freedom. And it basically tells the same story. Okay, so throughout this unit, if you were my students in my classroom, we would have been studying various different people that played a significant role in the fight for freedom and equality. You would learn how their contributions relate to the concept of freedom quilts and songs. So not only did they use freedom quilts, but they also used songs to guide slaves to freedom. Students will discuss the different patterns that were used in quilts and the significance of their design. And then I'm going to go into Gee's Bend, Alabama. So, do you think that family traditions are important?
Yes.
What are some traditions that you all share that you feel are important? Just off the top of your head.
We have a baby crib that we pass around, it's our family crib, and was a cradle that was handmade for our
And it was
family.
something you passed
Yes, we
down.
passed down to each baby.
I love that. Anybody else?
We have a family cradle that one of my ancestors made when he got back from the Civil War. And it's in my granny's house burned down, but they had loaned out the cradle, so the cradle was saved, so we're still passing
Oh,
that.
that's awesome.
We sing when we work or when we cook or when we play. Our grandmother did.
And it's just kind of a family tradition. It just kind of followed everyone along, didn't it? Yeah. And that's what they do definitely follow from generation to generation, as each of you were talking about. You're passing it on down. And we talked about how quilts do tell stories. Do they also portray love and beauty?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just in the same way that art can display hurt and fear and rage, it can also portray love and beauty. This would be a list of the materials, and at the end I did put a QR code so that you have all of this, and I'll also include the lesson plan on that for you. So I would introduce now to my students, this is a read aloud, it's called The Patchwork Path. It's by Betty Stroud, and it is about a little girl named Hannah and her dad. They're trying to go through the Underground Railroad, and her mother has made this quilt, and they use the quilt as a guide. So as we already know, I'm sure every single one of us have heard of freedom quilts. And of course there were many different types of shapes and things like that were used, and it all had significant meaning. Slaves, of course we know that they couldn't read or write, because if they could read and write, what could happen?
They were killed.
Absolutely, but if you can read and write, you can find your way out, right? So as a solution, they decided that the safe houses would keep quilts hanging from them with the designs telling the slaves what they need to do next. In many African cultures, quilt patterns were a traditional way of passing down information from generation to generation. And of course, they represented their secret codes and patterns. And with my class, I would just go through several different patterns and their meaning. wanting to get to the G-span part. And I also, when you get this is a neat thing to read over, and it's just the story of the Underground Railroad quilt, and it uses the different patterns to tell the story. Okay, so let's talk about G-span, Alabama. First, I want you to notice that it's in what's called Boykin, okay? What do I notice about Boykin? Well, I notice that it is covered on 3 sides by water, okay? Officially known as Boykin, G-span is a block of land that is enclosed on 3 sides by the Alabama River in what's known as Wilcox County. It was named for Joseph Gee. He was a large landowner from North Carolina, and he settled there in 1816. He brought slaves with him, and he established a cotton plantation. In 1845, the Gee brothers sold the plantation to a relative, Mark Pettaway. The Pettaways are now still in G-span, and they have carried on quilt making currently. The family name remains predominant in Wilcox County. It is approximately an hour and a half from Montgomery, 2.5 hours from Birmingham, and 4 hours from Atlanta. Okay, so the closest town is Camden. The only way that you can get to Boykin is this one road here, or by ferry. Okay? And that is even today. So, in 1962, what was taking place in 1962? I should have not clicked it. Civil rights, right? Okay. When I think of the 60s and civil rights, who do I think of? Martin Luther King. Okay. It was picking up speed very fast. Well, this was the ferry that they had to use, okay? Keep in mind, Boykin is predominantly black, okay? And this was the ferry. Also, this was the time that African Americans were getting their right to vote, right? Well, the people of Camden did not like that. They were not having it, okay? So it was shut down, and what was widely seen as an attempt by the whites to prevent blacks from the town of G-span from coming across the water to vote or take part in demonstrations. And there is an account of the sheriff. He said, we didn't close the ferry because they were black. We closed the ferry because they forgot they were black. I cannot even imagine those words coming out of his mouth, but, so they closed it. So what happens then?
They can't get over there.
They can't get over there, right? Okay, who do you think heard about it? Martin Luther King. Okay, I want you to look at the donkey. Do you know what pulled Martin Luther King when he passed away? Or when he was assassinated?
What now?
In his funeral, in his procession, do you know what held the casket?
The ferry. The ferry.
Mules pulled a wagon.
Mules. Named Bell from G-span, Alabama.
Ah.
He went to G-span. When he heard what was happening to the people of G-span, he went there. He encouraged them to vote, to go to Camden to register to vote. And they were inspired to do so. So they hooked up their mules and their carts, and they made the half-day's journey to Camden and voted. Well, they didn't come at no cost to them. Because of this, they lost their jobs. But it also inspired them to follow along with Dr. King. They also had a rich tradition of quilting. Many women from G-span were able to sell their quilts. And now we're going to talk about what they do today. So when Martin Luther King went to G-span, obviously everyone found out, right? So even though the people of Camden were trying to hurt G-span, what do you think it done?
It helped them.
Boosted the economy.
Yes, well, they're still extremely poor. However, well, let me go back to his wagon. We'll get there. I'm sorry, I'm ahead of myself. It doesn't end there for Bell. Bell was a donkey. And that was another read aloud that I share with my students, and it's over there. And it is a great book. When Dr. King was assassinated in 1968, the people of G-span were called upon again. They were asked to provide 2 mules to carry Dr. King's casket during the procession through the streets of Atlanta. Wouldn't you know it, when they got to Georgia, they were denied entry. Calls were made and they were finally allowed to pass. Belle and another mule named Ada carried Dr. King's casket unwaveringly through the streets of Atlanta amidst the thousands of people. They tried to say that the donkeys would not be able to adjust to the loud noise of all the people in Atlanta, and they tried to come up with every other excuse, but eventually they were able to get Belle. The Quilts and the people of G's Band have become world known. Michelle Obama's choice of dress for her official portrait paid tribute to G's Band. They also sell quilts on Etsy.
Good, great.
I added that this morning because they always are updating, and I wanted to see what the most expensive one I could find this morning was. $13,500.
No, I don't know, that one's pretty fancy, I'm not.
Isn't that awesome? They are also on display in different museums. They're in the Smithsonian. They have been in the White House. Also, just this week, Target is now carrying their merchandise.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And you can buy it online, just so you know. And this is some of the people from G's Band, and they do this by hand. They don't use the machines to do their quilting. And I thought it would be neat just to show you some of the original ones. And even though, like, this may not have tell a story in itself, but I loved when I was trying to look up different quilts that they had. This was Mary Lee Bendoff, and this is a housetop variation. It was quilted by her daughter, Essie Bendoff Petaway, in 2001. Mary Lee Bendoff remembers her sister-in-law's daughter sent these clothes down here and told her to give them away, but didn't nobody want them. That knit stuff clothes from way back yonder, don't nobody wear that no more, and the pants was all bell-bottom. We ain't got that out of style down here. I was going to take them to the Salvation Army, but didn't have no way to get there, so she just made quilts out of them. And this one, I like this one. This is Missouri Petaway. Blocks and strips work close quilt. Her daughter describes the quilt. It was when my daddy died. I was about 17 or 18. He stayed sick about 8 months and passed on. Mama said, I'm going to take his work clothes, shape them into a quilt to remember him, and cover up under it for love. She takes his old pants legs and shirt tails, take all the clothes he had, just enough to make that quilt, and I helped her tear them up. Bottom of the pants is narrow, top was wide. She had her cutting the top part out to shape them up, and that's a picture of the quilt. And now, that's a very common thing that we do now, like if your grandpa passes away, they may make a pillow or use different shirts to make those quilts. And another thing that a lot of people do is we'll take the t-shirts from our children and make the shirt quilts or whatever. So. And then Stitching and Pulling is another book about G's Band. It's so unheard of, but then when you learn about it, there's so much that I didn't even know was out there. So there's lots of read alouds. And I've got included in here in my room, this is the one that is 15 minutes, and we watched this in class, and it just kind of goes through their story, and there's lots of information on this website as well about G's Band. So last year when I originally had my class do this, we used just material scraps, and we used different patterns, and I let them come up with their own quilts. Well, that's what I submitted, and then they asked me if I could possibly kind of adapt it to where it would reach older children, or we could discuss that where it would reach older grade levels as well as 5th grade, which is what I teach. And I got to thinking, well, let's just do it as a heritage square. So one thing that I like to do in my classroom is all of my students, they're familiar with Martin Luther King, they're familiar with Rosa Parks, they're familiar with Ruby Bridges. But I want them to kind of expand their knowledge because there's so much that they don't know that I don't know, and we learn together. So I want them to reach out, find someone that we've studied throughout the unit that they didn't know last year or before we studied it this year. And so what they're going to do is they're going to create a heritage square based off of that person. So there's many different forms of material, beads, whatever, up there. And then you pick someone, and I made like 15 different folders of just different people, and I'm trying to get people that maybe some of us don't know about. I ran out of time and didn't get to make my sample, but this was the lady that I was gonna do. I fell in love with her. Her name is Joan Mulholland. I never heard of her before. Has anyone heard of her? Okay. Well, she was a member of the Freedom Riders. And she was a little southern white girl, just like myself. And she believed strongly in equality. So her parents had dreams of her going to Duke. They felt like that any participation in the Freedom Riders movement was unheard of, and she was completely disowned by her family. And so I was going to do mine on her. But there are many different people, and there are some, like I've got Sojourner Truth, and I have others that I know that you've heard of. But, or you are welcome to pick anybody that you know that you can come up with. And I want you to create a heritage square. And so by that I mean, this is what I'm going to show you first. This one. And I'm going to read you. I had one of my co-teachers make a sample for me. And it says, this heritage square was made to represent Bayard Rustin. I used skin tone paper to create mountains that represent the mountains African Americans had to climb over to gain their civil rights. He was an advisor to Martin Luther King Jr. and was one of the integral planning members of the Million Man March on Washington, D.C. The pamphlet that he created is placed over the mountains, resembling a covering of the sharpness and danger that come with the hate of the mountains with love. The red smudges represent the blood of the lives lost in the fight for civil rights, and the black smudges represent the fires of burning crosses, buildings, and houses. The black silk ribbon represents the march and very peacefully and smoothly marches across the sharpness, danger, and hate. Silk was used because of its smoothness, and it shows the love and peace that they marched. He once said, "We are all one, and if we don't know it, we will learn it the hard way." When an individual is protesting society's refusal to acknowledge his dignity as a human being, his very act of protest confers dignity within him. We need, in every community, a group of angelic troublemakers. Angelic troublemakers marched that day due to the planning of Bayard and so many others. And so that's hers. And I'll show the other one. This one represents Ruby Bridges. And she said, this quilt block represents Ruby Bridges. The large block symbolizes Ruby's lonely classroom. Each brown square represents an empty desk. The center block is Ruby. On her first day of school there, she wore a white bow in her hair. The white also represents her childlike innocence. The diamond orange at the top represents Ruby's soul teacher, Barbara Henry. Orange is used on the diamond and in other areas to represent courage. It took courage for Ruby, Ruby's family, and Barbara Henry to do what they did. I wanted viewers to get the sense of how lonely the classroom must have been with just one student. So, that's your assignment. And then, I do want to add, the writing piece that my students will do again this year. Over the last month, we have discussed many challenges African Americans have had to face based solely on their race. Today, you are a journalist for a local newspaper. Using Google Docs, please type a newspaper article giving tips on how to restrain oneself from judging others negatively based on the color of their skin and the importance of treating everyone equally. So that will be their assignment.
Tell us what the impact of the lesson had on you personally.
Well, by doing this lesson, I've learned so much more than I already know. But being in Mississippi and being married to an African American man myself, we fight many challenges as a couple. So that's why I love teaching this and learning more and sharing it with my kids at school. So. You can do these, right? Who has Emmett Till's mom? Did I get her?
Give it to his mom.
newspaper, more room, and, there's hot glue back there because there's some pretty heavy. And I do have these read alouds up here that you are welcome